Thanks, Betty. All right, thanks for joining us, everybody, for this webinar, the Navigating Digital Safe Spaces webinar. I'd like to thank my colleagues, Associate Professor Amy Conley-Wright and Dr. Betty Liu, who will be here with us today as well. And yeah, thank you all for giving up your lunchtime to join us. For Trish and anybody else who was later to join, if you could just use the QR code there to scan and sign in for. We'll be doing some interactive polling during the webinar. So if you're happy to do that, you can just easily use either the link or the QR code. So next slide, Betty. Before we start, I'd just like to acknowledge that the traditional owners of the land on which the University of Sydney, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and also the lands that I'm coming to you and Amy's coming to you today, the land of the Wadi Wadi people, the Dharawal Nation, and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and thank them for their continued care and custodianship of these lands and this country. And this is a beautiful artwork some of you may have seen before, that's on poker skin, on kangaroo skin. It's poker work that our colleague, Associate Professor Lynette Riley, does in her spare time. She's a very talented artist, and this is a lovely way to ground ourselves in the tree of knowledge that we all learn together. And this I guess this represents us. I suppose we're the sort of tree, and the soil and the land that we're on grounds us, and that's what we take nourishment from. And so it's great to have you join us and spend time with us, sharing our knowledge together today. So this project, the Navigating Digital Safe Spaces project for children in or adopted from care, is a project that Amy and I are involved with colleagues from Queen's University Belfast, who have been doing work primarily in the space of post-adoption contact. And obviously for us here, we've expanded this really to contemplate contact or family time across more broadly for children who are in long-term care arrangements, guardianship or open adoption. And we've got obviously a clear interest at the Research Centre in the family time space. We're doing work that many of you know about around supporting best practice and improving best practice in action research with government and non-government organisations in the out-of-home care space, and also with people with lived experience. So I guess we bring to this our own sort of unique knowledge and perspective here in Australia, and sharing that with our colleagues overseas and learning from them too about, and I guess we're all now interested in how to make family time work in the digital world. That's increasingly of interest. Clearly we are living in a space where not only are we having more options for digital communication, but it's become a necessity in the last 18 months, clearly, and has impacted on practice and on the lives of children and their families in all parts of their life, really. We also wanted to just throw up the notion of what's virtual and what's indirect. In Australia, we really are, in favour of direct contact. That's what the courts tend to prioritise, and direct is in-person and face-to-face, and that's sort of guided and led practice. And I suppose we've had an opportunity now to rethink what indirect actually means in the digital age. So just sort of throwing up what's virtual about having communication using technology. Is it what does this word imply? And is it lesser? And I suppose we're I guess we would challenge that sort of thinking and based on our own research, finding that it's actually really sort of meaningful, and certainly not a substitute, but certainly a complement. Again, in the child welfare space, thinking about challenging some of the sort of risk discourse that seems to pervade the way we think about family time and the way we think about children and their digital experiences in general. And the idea of sort of safety and risk online is really pervasive and is something that often worries adults in the lives of children, quite rightly in some cases. And so part of what we want to do is offer some practical tools and ideas and start to sort of percolate those ideas, share and aerate ideas amongst us today and beyond. So that's sort of our aim for today. Thanks, Betty. So as I mentioned, we're doing this interactive survey. It's entirely optional, but if you choose to and you have registered, with the QR code, you'll get the option of ranking, of giving us some feedback using your device, and we'll see the results together. So it's anonymous, but it also gives you a chance to participate and to have a bit of a think about what you know, what you don't know, how you use digital media in your practice, and what you think the benefits and challenges are. So we're also having a focus group at the end of this, and you're welcome to stay on. Some of you have already registered. If you haven't, you can still, it's not too late. And that's just a more in-depth discussion of this same issue and a chance to really sort of speak to what your experience has been, what your questions are. But actually, having said that, because it's such a small group, we're really welcoming people to post questions in the chat, and we'll try to keep an eye on that. Amy might do that. And you can also just, Liz is asking for the QR code. So do we want to go back to the first screen maybe? And so, yeah, there you go. Yeah, so feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to say something and put your hand up, or you can just say it in the chat as well. So that's the advantage of being a small group. Hopefully Liz has had a chance to use the QR code. That'll work okay, Liz? Good. Great.
Yeah, thanks.
Fantastic. All right, so the first question is in your work, do you use digital technology for family time between children and birth relatives currently? Some of you might not be doing that. Oh, there you go, often. And some of you won't be in a role that does that. So isn't that neat? There you go. So we got half and half. So at least sometimes most of you are using digital technology, and you're obviously working directly with children and families. So clearly that's why you've joined us today. That's great. So there's another question I think coming up, isn't there, Betty? Yep. So just your preferred social media platforms, and this might be, you might choose to do this, if you're not using these platforms at work, it might just be in general, like what are your favorite social media platforms, and how, and they'll come up as a frequency. There you go. Teams. So Zoom's, yeah, most common. That would be probably the same as certainly mine. Okay. Oh, that's neat. And Facebook, let's see that shrinking over time, I hope. Nobody's on Twitter except Amy. But there you go. All right, so thanks for that, giving us a sense of what you do. And what about your skills, and just sort of ranking how you see yourself in terms of your knowledge, your skills and confidence, and the kind of, I guess, the range of video conferencing apps and other things you use. Also your internet connection, is that a problem for you where you live? Obviously it will be for some people, depending where you're living. So you see yourself as being pretty skilled and confident, and having access to a fair number of sort of apps to connect with. and digital internet connections a problem for some of you, but not most. Yeah, and that's great to see that. I guess that's probably what's interested you today too, is, room for improvement with your confidence and knowledge too. So that's great. Thank you. So just in terms of setting the scene, this is a pretty recent report about children's media use. Actually, everybody, children and parents, media use. And what you can see is that even from the age of 3, children are using digital media. Mostly, not surprisingly, tablets probably owned by their parents at that earlier age, but you can see that from sort of, there's a real spike once children reach sort of 10 and above in access to smartphones, and obviously that means that it's really portable and it's a lot more hard to, I guess, monitor by adults, those really portable devices. But just to sort of, I suppose, tell us that even amongst 3 to 4 year olds, 25% have their own tablet, according to this research, and 1 in 5 use a smartphone and go online, even at that early age, and that increases at every age group until we get to 12 to 15 year olds, in which, that group, 8 out of 10 have a smartphone and use it regularly to go online. So we're talking about this concept of digital natives. I mean, it's really sort of clear and evident here that if you've got 80% of 12 year olds and above using that, that's going to be something they're going to have be becoming skilled and proficient in every year. So I think that's an important reminder for us when we're thinking about supporting children's uses, that sometimes they may have more knowledge than the adults who are in the room. And I guess that's what a lot of introduces some of the things we'll be discussing in terms of the risks and safety and rights of children in this space. Thanks, Betty. And that's, I guess, the 3 ways that the Navigating Digital Safe Spaces project thinks about these issues can be kind of encapsulated into sort of rights, relating, and resilience. And so that's how we'll be, I'll be talking about them today. There's these 3 sort of, I guess, thematic areas. What are children's rights? What do we know about their rights to digital access and digital worlds? And how do they relate? What do they use it for? And how does it help them relate? And what are some of the pros and cons around that, or the drawbacks? And then how do we support children to be resilient in the use of digital technology in general? So the literature that I'll be drawing on isn't always about family time. So in some ways, we're sort of trying to extrapolate, because there isn't necessarily a lot written about contact or family time in the digital space. It's coming, not surprisingly, with COVID, but it really, these issues have been thought about more broadly for children. So yeah, we'll be looking at sort of those safety and risk issues and balancing those. Thanks, Betty. So thinking about the first one, in March 2021, the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child talked about, this issue of children's rights and how we apply children's rights to the digital world. We've got the convention, and which doesn't really speak directly to the world of the digital worlds that children exist in, but it does speak to their connections and to their right to relationships that are important to them, and the right to have access to support with relationships. there's also a responsibility on governments to protect children's rights online, and we have here in Australia, you know, the National Children's Commissioner. We have e-safety commissioners that have documented, you know, guidelines for adults in how to assist children to navigate this. The digital world, the digital platforms and so on, and what some of the sort of safety precautions adults can put in place depending on the age of the child. So it is really important, though, that parents get support, parents and carers get support in understanding the digital world, because it's often not, parents and adults in children's worlds are not the digital natives necessarily. And it's especially true in out-of-home care, and some of you will know this, where children might be living with older carers whose whose skills, confidence and knowledge really is far surpassed by that of the children, even very young children that are living with them. Issues of digital access have been raised here. You know, there is recognition that you know, in reflecting other forms of inequity, there are inequities in the distribution of access to the digital world for children, and those are, you know, those sort of stem from the same sort of socioeconomic factors and geographic factors, you know, a principle is that children's rights are, you know, shouldn't be affected by those things. They should have equal rights, irrespective of what family they live in and where their home is. And children's age is another consideration. So recognition that, and this is relevant to work in the family time and out-of-home care space, is that older children will expect different rights and will be entitled to different rights. They're rights holders with you know, as they grow towards adulthood, it's expected that they'll want to exercise those rights differently, and they will be doing that. So just to recognise that. And conversely, a lot of apps are not really suitable or designed for use with younger children, and that can sometimes be a barrier to their access to relationship and relating. So just some of the things to think about, you know, more need for sort of development and design in that space for younger children. Okay. So I don't know if you have come across the concept of sharenting. You'll know it when you hear about it. So it's the sharing of images of children by adults, parents, generally, without their consent. So this is not just in the out-of-home care space. It's not just an issue that infringes on children's rights to the privacy and integrity of their own images. It is a general issue, but obviously has particular relevance and plays out in particular ways for children when they're in out-of-home care, where you know, images might be being shared without their knowledge, without their caregiver's knowledge, and certainly without their consent. But it's also important to recognise that sometimes those images are shared because as an attempt to forge a connection that by birth relatives that may be sort of impacted by their child not living with them, and perhaps by the other things that are going on in terms of how often they see them and how often they have that contact. So this is obviously something that is really difficult to navigate, and I'm sure I'd be really interested to hear from you guys, because you know, these conversations are sensitive conversations, but you know, how we navigate this and how we sort of ensure that a rights perspective comes into the conversations with adults about the sharing of children's images, and in recognising that in general, the law does tend to place greater value on parents in terms of of children, the rights of parents And when there's a conflict between the rights of parents to share content and the rights of children to online privacy, this is a kind of a, something's happened there, Betty. We can see your background things now. There we are. So the judiciary tends to leave adults and parents as the guardians of children to determine what's in their interests here in terms of their privacy as well. So again, you as caseworkers and others in this area may need to have conversations with caregivers about how to help them respect the rights and understand children's rights. But also that sometimes this sharing can be a way for children to reach out and positively connect and actually gain a sense of their own narrative and story. So it's not necessarily only an area that needs to be considered in terms of rights or privacy, but actually in terms of their right to connection. And it's balancing these two things where it can sometimes be really helpful to have that conversation and involve the child in that conversation, and to see that sometimes this is a way, sharing photos is a way of celebrating a child's achievements, especially if you are a parent that hasn't been able to participate directly in some of the things your child does. So trying to sort of understand everybody's perspective, and also that it's not just, privacy isn't the only consideration here in terms of parenting. There are many other things that particularly pertain to children who are living away from birth family. Thanks, Betty. And so in thinking about boundaries, that's come up in this has come up in a recent evidence review that is about family time and digital technology. And certainly we found it in research we've done here in New South Wales, that actually it's a great way for children's homes and their birth family to be integrated together. So FaceTime, Zoom, video conferencing platforms and so on, give children a chance to be able to integrate the two parts of their lives in a really meaningful way, which family time, direct family time, often doesn't present for them. It's less common than not for children to be going into the home of their birth mother or father, or for them to be coming into their home. That's not as typical. Obviously, it's more common in kinship care, but so this is a really great way of also children safely introducing parents to their home and showing them around. So, and we found in our research that we've been doing with the Fostering Lifelong Connections program that was a really key thing that it really reassured parents to know where their child was sleeping and to see that home, and also was a great way of connecting carers and parents through those visits that were happening using digital technology. So it's important that in this literature review, there was also some children who were used to having supervised visits at a neutral location who found it quite confronting to have video conference calls with their parents in their home. And they liked that distance, which I think, again, just points to the need to bring children into the conversation about what works for them, and to bring them into the conversation, and if they're young, to listen to how they're feeling about it through their responses. And other research has also shown that video calls are a way to involve birth parents in activities that they might not get to go to otherwise, their children's lives. So it might be a way to involve them in a birthday party, for instance. If it's not possible because of distance or other reasons for them to attend, they can be invited to, and this is all starting to happen quite organically anyway. So yeah, we're just the research evidence is kind of catching up. But we'll also show some tip sheets about this a little bit later on of how you can creatively use this to enhance some of this involvement in everyday activities and to break down those barriers between carers and birth parents that can sort of build up where carers are not directly involved in visits. It also has pros and cons for children's level of control. So children can start to, self-direct their own visits rather than having to wait to be picked up on a certain day at a certain time. They can start to initiate. And even from a younger age, this is also the case. And it's also happening. This is the thing we are hearing. This is happening in New South Wales, where children are starting to be able to lead those family time interactions. So it does kind of give children this greater choice and control, which is one of the things that is about rights holders. You know, you have responsibilities, you also have greater choice and control. So, yep, that's so in terms of what you think are the most or least challenging aspects of digital family time, just rank these, and you can just move around to tell us which ones you think are the most to the least. So privacy, personal boundaries, yeah. Yep. That really resonates with what we found in our research too, that just that navigating of the boundaries between, when it was appropriate. I'm thinking we can sort of delve into this a bit more too, but what we heard was that those boundaries sometimes needed to be renegotiated when there was more opportunity for family time to happen from a distance. You needed to constantly be sort of just working out when it was appropriate to be initiating, how often children get to do this, whether you as the carer, the carer needs to be answering the video call every time, or how to this sort of negotiating this new terrain of relationships where it's not around sort of scheduled visits, but more around spontaneity. Privacy is still coming up, understandably, as a concern, and I think that speaks to those issues around how well the technology and is attuned to younger children, particularly, and how well the privacy settings, how easy they are to manage. So yeah, that's really interesting. And communication, the least important. So it's obviously not a barrier to. It's not a challenge. It's less of a challenge than those others. Creating rapport can sometimes be hard. Yeah, that's really interesting, and we'll pick up on these the focus group. But feel free to add anything to the chat. Is there anything anything coming up, Amy? Actually, the next screen I think is you can actually tell us about some of those specific challenges if you'd like. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it is challenging engaging younger children. And yep, the access to technology, yeah, that's come up a lot. And that again is that issue about you know, what sort of support families need. It's that sort of it's a new issue, isn't it? Because sometimes families may have had problems getting to physical visits, and agencies have worked around that perhaps, but these are new issues that you're then having to confront around whether they actually have the ability from their home to dial into a FaceTime call or a Zoom meeting. And children being screened out. So is that, so they have shorter visits. They might not get and that sometimes can mean it's unsatisfying, I guess, for some of those children, potentially. The boundaries and respect, yeah, I think there are new boundaries, and it's probably a lot of work for professionals to be helping people renegotiate those and not feel that they're being something about their rights as are being undermined somehow. Yeah, carers, yeah. 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 Yep. That issue about whether children feel it's a safe space and whether carers have enough support. I mean, there's a lot of new work happening for agencies, I think, in this space, isn't there? There's just a lot of new things that are coming up that are unfamiliar things that you're having to deal with, because the world that you're working in was set up primarily for face-to-face visits where these sorts of issues weren't so, or you were addressing things like safety in very different ways where people were physically together. Schedules, yep. And I think sometimes that thing about parents not showing up to physical visits can sometimes still keep happening in the digital world, and it can be even more disappointing for children if they if they've initiated it. It's not just something they've been going along to, they've actually initiated it. It can be even, carers having to deal with that. Yep, thank you very much. We'll keep these and we'll return to them, and really appreciate that. Are there any challenges we didn't mention that you think, and you could just, as a single word, anything that, we talked about rapport and communication and privacy, are there things you think we've not included? Yeah, good one. Accountability. So is that about who's accountable for making it happen? And so somehow, in a way, moving away from agencies being involved directly so much starts to raise questions. This is different to privacy, but around who makes sure it happens, I guess. Who makes sure that children are actually getting this opportunity to have those visits, virtual visits, if you like, or whatever, with not just parents but other important people in their life, including their siblings. Yeah, it's a really good point. Okay, Betty, thank you. Okay, so the next of the sort of thematic areas is around relating, and as I've sort of said, digital communication is now very familiar and commonplace for all of us, and particularly for children and young people, who are, so-called digital natives. It's sometimes a more normal way to interact than in sort of physical time, if you like. So, and it also means that you can be available at any time. It's available for anybody at any time, at any age. So it has this kind of potential equalizing effect. Is potentially very equitable, on one level. It can be a less, perhaps just the next slide actually, Betty. So the pros and cons of the online environment for relating is it can be a less intense way for children to stay in touch. So that can be really important in the context of out-of-home care, where, you know, for instance, if it arouses sort of anxiety or nervousness or other sorts of big emotions for children, the digital option of communicating can actually be preferable, because it can shrink some of those emotions down. It can make it less intense, and you can do it more spontaneously, so it can be shorter and all of those sort of things. So it can, and the research says this, that actually, you know, children and young people may feel more comfortable talking about things that they wouldn't necessarily talk about in person. So it can be the online space, and we know there's a lot of children's relationships are conducted online, and that's where they learn to communicate about some of the things that might be sensitive to them or emotional. So you know, it's important to recognise that that's actually happening, and maybe it isn't the same as the adults in their world may still prefer in person, but this is what children's world, young people's worlds are like. So it can be less intense too, in terms of the like functions. You know, children and young people will get a lot out of that sort of very simple action of liking or something, and of having something liked. It's a very simple way to get that sort of affirmation. So, you know, again, this is a normalised way of communicating for children. It's important to recognise that. The difference between sort of synchronous and asynchronous communication. So, you know, where you're not necessarily, the response isn't necessarily at the same time as the person makes the communication. So sometimes, you know, if you're posting something, it may be asynchronous, and just remembering that also has a bearing on how, and you know, how the communication feels for children and young people, but they also have learnt to do that. So, but it does always also mean that they're kind of they're always on, and that's something about sort of managing their relationships, because they are always, you know, if children are often, if they're using these digital devices, that communication can be potentially happening at all times of the day and night. So, and they may not have the self-control to manage that pace. And that distance between, you know, you making a comment and you getting a response is something else that can be experienced as a form of pressure for children, you know, waiting for the like to go up to your post or whatever. So so that's kind of what the research tells us, that you know, the drawback is if you knew you were having a call from, you know, your brother, your mother, a family time call was scheduled for a certain time, you could be waiting for that. But if that scheduling isn't happening anymore, if it's been kind of decided that the flexible is better, it can again leave children sort of waiting and increase pressure on them. So, you know, there can be damage done to a relationship if responses aren't the way the child or young person wants them. So emojis also, the literature tells us that emojis are sometimes really hard to interpret, and there's generational differences in how they're used and how they're interpreted, and so that can be something to be really aware of and mindful of, because it can lead to breakdowns in communication. And again, in the context of family time, where you're, you know, as professionals, your work is to try to sort of strengthen and build those relationships, you might not be aware that's happening, because you think, oh, well, they're having this communication and having it frequently, and it might not be something you're attuned to, or even that the carer is. So this speaks to the next issue around building up children and young people's emotional emotional literacy and skills to navigate this world. Thanks, Betty. So this is, that's from the same study. So that we had the graph of before. So huge percentage of teenagers and adults talk about concerns about going online. They are nervous about online. So 9 in 10 adult internet users use online messages, video calls, and emails at least weekly. And that when parents are using online frequently, the children also will mirror that. So there'll be more frequency in that. And that includes things that we talked about with sharing. If children see adults are sharing images of them, they will then share those, feel that they've got permission to share images. And that again is something that, of adults and of themselves. And so this is something that needs to be really sort of talked through with children and young people, what's appropriate. And I guess it sort of points to the fact that children are, again, always watching adults and learning from adults. So some of the resilience building really is relying on adults in their lives. And that, obviously for children in out-of-home care, they're learning from the adults in the family they're living with, the adults in the family, their birth families, and from you as important adults that they're seeing. So the Children's Commissioner recommends parents also need education because their confidence and knowledge and awareness of what's going on may not be as they may not be as equipped as they need to be, and without sort of inducing fear, trying to sort of educate. So this is a really whole of family approach is what's being encouraged. Thanks, Betty. So again, a report from the Children's Commissioner talked about children needing to develop something called, this critical awareness of how to interpret media and images that they see online. And these are new skills for children that are required because of the amount of content they're seeing online and the amount of it they're seeing without necessarily having access to somebody to filter that or to communicate with them about that. So they need to be learning these skills themselves of how to differentiate what images have been tampered with or curated and altered, and how that maps onto their own understanding and appreciation of their own real lives and what they see in the real world. So they need skills and adults also. You need to help them build the skills in understanding the algorithms that are being used. So why they're being given certain content, why they're seeing certain ads, why stuff is coming their way, and how they can start to control that a little bit and take control of that. So it's a full education, not just in terms of their ability, how they're communicating, but what the information they're getting and how they can be active agents in what they see on the screen. So to understand this digital world is just like any other world, with huge amounts of benefits, huge amounts of people in it, and huge amounts of conflicting information. And so it's and for young people, the peer pressure that comes with their involvement in certain digital communities and certain digital environments, and teaching children how to switch off, teaching children how to learn the skills themselves of, it's like we teach babies how to self-soothe, how to switch off and disconnect. So, and there was something from the Children's Commissioner report: young people who perceive interacting on social media as different from real life, may take more risks online, or engage in behaviour that they would not do when they're offline. So trying to get them to understand this is another part of their social world in general, so integrating it within their social world. And in terms of children who used active strategies, so that sort of agentic strategies, fare better. They cope better than those who use passive strategies, which is like ignoring the issue, just leaving the site. Active strategies might be telling a friend or a parent something you've seen that disturbs you, or blocking a contact, or modifying your privacy settings. So you see actually skilling children to do some of this stuff. Importantly, some of the research talks about children with intellectual disability, where they may be having particular difficulties in doing some of this discernment of the differences between different forms of information and the reliability of that on digital platforms, and needing more support to differentiate fantasy from reality, perhaps, and understanding risk. Some of this, is also true of younger children, and teaching them, and this concept of warm experts that model and guide safe and rewarding, I guess, safe and positive internet usage. Thanks, Betty. So that this idea of adults' roles in actively supporting children to mediate. I'm just conscious of the time, so I'm just going to, I think we can skip over this, and going to thinking about understanding children's usage, young children, where we know that the devices are not designed for them, but they're using them. And they're often co-using the same device. So children living in families where there are children of different ages may be sharing the same tablet or the same laptop, and therefore seeing content that is not suitable or not designed for their age. And this can be a really big problem in larger families and in caregiving families. So you really building these skills in early age, that self-advocacy skills, is really super important. So that you can you can't always be policing. So it's important that children learn the skills. And just the next slide, Betty, is many will have seen this, but this was some of the, this is a tip sheet that we developed as part of the project that Hayley and Trish are part of, and Care South, Kylie's caseworkers, are part of, called Fostering Lifelong Connection. So we worked with and heard from caseworkers what was going on for them last year, and developed this tip sheet about how you can adapt family time to suit particular children, and some of the things you might think about. So how to make it interactive and fun, particularly for younger children, how to make it shorter, so it's time, it's suitable to their concentration, it's suitable to the time of day that works for them to be sitting on a screen. Maybe it's done outdoors, and just some of the things. So we can share this in the chat. It was tips primarily for adults in how to support children. So in terms of benefits, just thinking about what you would see as the least to the biggest benefits of digital family time. So we've heard about the challenges that are being navigated. What about in terms of the things that are good and that have enhanced family time for children and young people that you work with? Hard to differentiate some of these. They're probably, I know if I was doing it, I'd think some of them are equal number ones. So it's tricky to have to do that. But and some of it will depend on children's age, and you'll get a chance to tell us in open text, the next screen, some of the reasons why you think this. Yeah. Yeah, flexibility's got to be right up there, doesn't it? And that goes hand in hand with children then being able to lead those conversations more and say, I want to, you know, show, you know, Dad, the cake I've just made. Yeah, super convenient. And some of those issues for children who are separated, where there's a lot of siblings and they're separated, living in separate households, can be really difficult and logistically difficult for you as caseworkers to organise those visits and make them not, you know, make them happen, make the visits happen. But this can be really good. A convenience is way up there. So fun is least important, but a less intense form of connecting. Yeah. Yeah, it'd be really interesting to hear why you've picked these. So we might go to the next slide, Betty. You can tell us the benefits and why. Yeah, absolutely. I think adults find the filters pretty fun too. Sometimes it can really brighten up a dull meeting when somebody turns into a cat or whatever. Yeah, that's spot on. Geography matters less, doesn't it? And that can be a really big barrier for face-to-face visits and children getting to have as much time as many opportunities. Yep, and that's great, because that's so true too, that when you're trying to support carers to feel confident to supervise visits, this is such a great way to start, even when, you know, we all hope that we're going to end up not in lockdown and that physical visits will be able to be resumed. If carers kind of have this, their hand held to be able to have visits in the digital space to their home, they are, you know, more likely. And we did hear this from carers, caseworkers that were talking about carers they were working with. New relationships. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. That's a fantastic point, actually. Yeah. So you might find that children are able to connect with new people in their birth family that weren't even on the radar as somebody that was in their life, and it might be an adult sibling or so on. And that's a really great way. Yeah. That's right. So it's focused on the children. It's not just child-led, but it's actually more about what they want and what they need, which might be really infrequent phone calls or video chats. Yeah, travel time. Yeah, thank you. That's great. That's excellent. Thanks, Betty. So is there anything we didn't offer you as an option that you think was missing? That's another benefit of digital family time. And we really heard in our research that it's not going anywhere, that, you know, even people sort of imagining the post-pandemic, post-lockdown world, that this has started to become, you know, a new way of practicing, that caseworkers are now just starting those conversations about, okay, so that you've got this visit, you know, at a park on this date, what about in between times? It's starting to really become part of normal practice for workers, and probably a normal part of children's lives then too, and their carers' lives. So right on the 1 o'clock, and it might not be any other benefits anyone wants to share. So we might just move over to the next slide. Thank you all so much for joining us, and hope you've taken away a couple of little kernels. we can share these slides afterwards with people who've registered. You can share them with others. We might have another one of these webinars later. And if you want to stay on, there'll be a focus group. It'll be 45 minutes or up to an hour. You can come and stay as long as you can. No, you've given up your lunch break already. We will be on air recording it, but it'll only be the research team that'll see that. And otherwise, thank you very much for joining us and contributing and participating in this interactive. And thank you so much to Betty for being the MindMeister guru. It's great fun to play with this, and I hope you had fun as well, everybody.